Take my life, Usul. It is the only way.
I'm pointing the way!
61 billion dead. That was the price of one savior. We're taught to look at Arrakis and see a heroic story of liberation, brave desert rebels overthrowing a corrupt empire. But that is a lie. The Fremen were never heroes. They became the most devastating force of genocide the Imperium had ever unleashed upon itself. In this universe, the true power of an army is never measured by its technology or its warships. It is measured by its sheer capacity for blind fanaticism. To understand how the galaxy burned, we have to look back thousands of years before Paul Atreides was even born. The Bene Gesserit sisterhood spent generations planting manufactured myths on primitive worlds through the Missionaria Protectiva. On Arrakis, they seeded the legend of the Lisan al-Gaib, a prophesied savior who would turn the desert into a green paradise. It was designed as a simple safety net, a way to ensure that any stranded sister could find a desperate population ready to protect her. They thought they were planting a survival myth. They were actually planting the seeds of a holy war.
So much potential wasted in a male. You were told to bear only daughters, but you in your pride thought you could produce the Kwisatz Haderach.
Was I wrong?
That brings us to House Atreides and the tragic illusion of honor. On paper, their force was magnificent. Duncan Idaho and Gurney Halleck spent years building a highly disciplined, loyal elite force. They were deeply respected by the Emperor himself, who saw their growing influence as a direct threat to his throne. The Atreides fought with a rigid, old-school sense of duty. But in a universe ruled by sociopaths, honor is a death sentence. They did not lose because they lacked skill. They lost because they were predictable. They marched in perfect, beautiful formation, straight into an obvious political trap, wiped out in a single night because they trusted the rules of a broken system. They were destroyed before they could ever become a true imperial force. They lost everything, and they took almost no one with them. Then we have the pathetic brutality of House Harkonnen. They do not have an army of warriors. They have an army of brutalized industrial conscripts, dragged from the toxic, grease-stained urban wastelands of Gaidi Prime. The Baron doesn't inspire loyalty. He rules through numbers, artillery, and terror. But their military is built entirely on fear, rather than conviction. The moment the harsh desert stripped away their technological advantages, their forces collapsed under the relentless pressure of the Fremen. The Harkonnens are guilty of immense cruelty, but their evil is small-minded. They kill for spice quotas and balance sheets. They lack the absolute conviction to reshape a galaxy. For generations, the only force keeping the peace was the Emperor's personal death cult, the Sardaukar. They were bred on Seleucia Secundus, an imperial prison world so hostile, so choked by toxic storms and lethal predators, that few survived to adulthood. The Corino Empire intentionally kept this planet a living hell. They knew that extreme misery, paired with relentless, ritualistic conditioning, breeds monsters. The military culture of Seleucia Secundus was built on blood sacrifices and absolute submission. They did not just fight, they worshipped the Padisha Emperor as a living god, dedicating their lives to a fanatic, blood-soaked martial art. A single Sardaukar was worth several trained soldiers. They froze the galaxy's politics in fear for 10,000 years. Yet, they were ultimately just tools. They were the violent enforcers of a stale, corrupt status quo. They committed atrocities, but only to keep the existing wheel turning. They wanted to police the world, not destroy it. But where the Sardaukar fought to enforce order, the Fremen brought an apocalyptic break. Arrakis made the Fremen harder than Seleucus Secundus ever could. In this desert, the environment itself dictated the terms of war. Because of the Holtzman shield effect, standard ranged warfare is suicidal. If you shoot a personal shield with a laser, it triggers a catastrophic subatomic fusion reaction that vaporizes both shooter and target. This reaction forced the galaxy back into a brutal medieval reality where you have to look a man in the eye to kill him. And nobody was better at close quarters slaughter than the Fremen. At the absolute tip of this spear was the Fedaykin, Paul's personal death commandos. They were a brotherhood bound by lethal desert training and an absolute, unyielding devotion to their messiah. They fought like men who had already accepted death. They appeared where no army should exist, then disappeared back into the desert before anyone could answer. They rode giant sandworms as siege weapons, turning the desert's apex predators into tactical transport. When Paul claimed the throne, he did something no emperor had ever dared. He seized absolute control of the spies. This gave him total leverage over the Spacing Guild. Without spice, their navigators were blind, and interstellar travel would collapse. To survive, the guild was forced to open their massive highliners to the Fremen. The desert warriors boarded the massive starships, packing into the cargo bays like locusts, completely bypassing the galaxy's orbital defenses. They did not just defeat the Sardaukar. Driven by the manufactured myth of the Lisan al-Gaib, they carried out a holy crusade across the known universe. They slaughtered over 60 billion people. They rendered entire worlds uninhabitable, wiped out dozens of peaceful religions, and drove countless noble houses into extinction. And they did it all with a song in their hearts, believing they were cleansing the universe. They are the most guilty military in Dune, because they chose to exchange their freedom for a god. Paul Atreides saw this coming. His prescience was not a gift, it is a prison. He saw countless futures, but in every single path where humanity survived, the jihad still found a way to ignite. He saw the piles of skulls, the burning worlds, the billions of voices screaming his name in terror. The Holy War was a runaway train, and Paul was merely strapped to the tracks. He was a savior who had lost control of his own salvation. But the nightmare did not end with Paul. It was perfected by his son, later the second, and his terrifying force, the Fish Speakers. Later the second ruled as a giant human-worm hybrid for 3,500 years, enforcing his golden path with an all-female army. He chose women because he believed a female military structure was far less prone to outward expansion, conquest, and the endless cycles of aggression that defined traditional male armies. The Fish Speakers were not just soldiers. They were a religious sisterhood, a policing force that kept humanity under suffocating control. They performed sacred rituals, maintained the God Emperor's absolute bureaucracy, and ruthlessly crushed any spark of rebellion. Their purpose was not conquest. but pacifying humanity into stagnation. Under their absolute grip, the human species was kept in a state of forced, artificial peace for millennia, stripped of its ambition, its curiosity, and its drive to explore. The tragedy of Dune is not that the bad guys won. It is that the victims became the ultimate monsters. Long before the Holy War even ran its course, Paul Atreides realized the most terrifying thing of all. The Savior was already a prisoner of his own temple. He understood what his empire had become, and still walked into the desert anyway. So what would you actually do when the Savior you prayed for becomes the monster you can never escape?